You are listening to Faithless Brewing, a Magic the Gathering podcast for the Spike Rogue. Each week we design new decks for tournament play. We put our creations to the test and share our findings on the air. The regional championships are in the books, where 1,200 players tried to break Pioneer. Lawson Zandi joins us from Dreamhack Dallas to share the latest technology, from Boros Convoke, Rakdos Goblins, a new Inverter combo, and much more. That's all coming up on Faithless Brewing. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to the Faithless Brewing podcast. I'm your host, Dan Schriever, also known as Cavedan, coming to you from deep in the heart of Texas. And I'm joined once again by a returning host maybe, fresh off of Dreamhack Dallas. It's Lawson Zandi. Lawson, welcome.
Howdy, howdy. I am also deep in the heart of Texas, about 4 hours north of you, though, because Texas is big.
So I realized as I was saying this that I have no concept of the proper Texas accent. Do you have like a Texas drawl?
I don't have much of a Texas drawl. If I go deep West Texas, I have a super big one because I will spend time with my family out there. But no, if I am around city folk, it is okay. I sound like an adult, but you know, it can happen. It can happen. I'm not trying to hide it. I have no shame.
Well, if you can pull it off, you're welcome to like redo the Texas intro. But yeah, great to have you back, Lawson. It's been a while. Always great to hear from you.
Thank you. Always happy to be here. Randomly today, I know this might be a surprise to the listeners, but I'm super excited to talk Pioneer. I know I've always been the modern guy who only wants to talk about the modern, but I'm here to talk to Pioneer.
Yeah. So what happened there? We're usually hearing about your sick 5.0 modern brews, your Windbrisk Heights obsession, or if you're in the Faithless Brewing Discord, Lawson is often there cracking the latest draft format, racking up trophies. But a couple weeks back, you messaged me about this insane Boros Pioneer deck, and you said you've been going very, very deep.
Deep is definitely an understatement. I have worked really, really hard to try and do some really, really cool things. I definitely won't say I'm a, Pioneer one trick in any sorts, but I had some buddies that were qualified for the event. They have a little bit less free time to do testing than me. They're also a little bit less tied into Magic and don't have access to every Magic card that they could think of. So I told them that I'd be more than happy to do some testing and, pass along some information that I found. And boy, oh boy, did I find some information.
Yeah, I can't wait to pick your brain about that. So before we dive into all that, just some context. The event we're talking about here is the United States Regional Championship, also known as Dreamhack Dallas, another event deep in the heart of Texas. And just down the road from you, Lawson. So even though I think you and I were not qualified, you did make it down to the event. I understand you spent most of the weekend there, watching some games, coaching some games even, and just getting the lay of the land, picking up on all the latest tech.
Yeah, it was definitely weird. I come from a background of playing Magic very, very competitively. I've been a little bit out of the paper scene for grinding events. I had some work stuff going on this weekend, but, when I finished up in the morning, I went straight to Dreamhack, where it's, Magic players and cosplayers all around, and I'm in a, 3-piece suit and walking around with a notepad. Looked like I was, a scout or a, basketball coach, But it was a lot of fun. Had 8 guys that I had been working with, and then had a lot of big time buddies that I hadn't really got to spend time with in a while. So I got to be really, really hands-on with them when it comes to, what's going on in the format in their eyes. And yeah, can't ask for anything better when it comes to Magic.
I'm just picturing you as like a Magic talent scout, like a Friday Night Lights high school game or something, compiling your top 100 Magic prospects list in the state of Texas.
Hey man, I brought pizza to my guys, it was, middle of round 7, guys finishing up a long match, and, he was out of it. So gotta get that boy some calories and get him into the next one. So
Yeah. So for those of you who are not as up to speed on the current state of organized play, a little refresher might be in order. When we say regional championships, or RCs, we are talking about a tournament that is one step below the Pro Tour. The Pro Tour returned just this year, actually, and that's a 3 times per year event that, when it happens, looks a little bit like the Pro Tours of old. People from all around the world have qualified as kind of the highest level, just one step shy of Worlds. So you get players from Japan, from Europe, from the USA, from Latin America. That's the Pro Tour, of which Minneapolis was the most recent iteration. Now, feeding each Pro Tour is the Regional Championship, which is a little bit of a misleading name because back in our day, Lawson, regionals was, somewhere between like your local event and national championships.
Mm-hmm.
But here, region means like nationals or perhaps even bigger. So the like Latin American region is all of South America, and they get one slot or something like that. It's quite sad.
Maybe 4.
I think 2 slots is what they're going to get now. It's actually quite brutal.
2.
So first of all, you have to qualify for these tournaments. So when you hear myself or Lawson talking about an RCQ that we went to at the shop on a weekend, like a 1K or whatever, winning that event might earn you a qualification to the upcoming regional championship. And you can think of those as basically a nationals. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way of putting it. A lot of small feeder events from local places. Hey, if you can win your store's 32-man sealed deck tournament, you can go play with the best and brightest of your community in Dallas, Texas at a big, gaming event. Which, by the way, Dreamhack is a huge gaming event. I don't know how many Magic players keep up with other esports, but there were, every major esports team at this thing doing other stuff. There was a Fortnite tournament, a Halo tournament, a Smash tournament, a Rocket League World Championship event. So it was a giant event for, professional gaming and also Magic players. They did sequester us off in a corner because we take up more room and are harder to deal with than any other, one, I think. So, it is what it is, but it's cool to be with the pretty people of the world.
They put you in the tabletop annex across the street, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so regional championships / nationals, they will happen 3 times a year. This one in Dallas was Pioneer format. So Lawson mentioned his team, or his friends, were qualified for this. In order to do well at this event, you had to really crack the metagame at the top tier of Pioneer. And just the way the timing worked out, this Boros Hogaak, or Boros Convoke deck, broke onto the scene, about 3 weeks ago? Is that roughly when you started?
Yeah, I would say, 2 weeks ago is when it hit its pinnacle of people trying to beat it. But yeah, I think the first, list came out probably 3, maybe 3.5 weeks ago. So still very, very new. Lot to, work on in it.
In the past, 3 weeks before a big event might be just enough time for a deck to get perfected and take the event by storm, but those days are long gone. These days, in the age of Twitter and Twitch streamers, 3 weeks is enough time for the deck to be declared broken, be declared unplayable, to go through like 6 or 7 life cycles of death and rebirth, and really get hammered out. So I'm curious to hear all about your process working on the Boros deck, Lawson, and how many of your team members ended up playing it in the event.
So we were ready to field 8 copies of it. We only ended up fielding 2. The biggest thing that I will say when it comes to the red-white deck overall, and this is kind of like the day 0 preparing for the event, was this deck is incredibly easy to play bad against. When you don't know the rules of engagement, you lose. You just lose the game no matter what deck you're playing. A lot of people, they want to hold their fatal push to kill things that are powerful and good cards. And against the red-white deck, you want it to kill a piece of cardboard. It doesn't have to have any text on it, The thing that people were making mistakes on when I first picked the deck up is, you play your Thraben Inspector on turn 1, and you never want to push someone's Thraben Inspector. That doesn't feel like a win. They got a clue, But if you don't push my Thraben Inspector, turn 2, I can, Gleeful Demolition the clue. Now I've got 3 1/1s. If you're not pushing my 1/2, you're definitely not pushing my 1/1s. And then, maybe I play another random 1-drop, Are you going to push this? Well, I'm sorry to let you know, once that creature comes into play, you don't get priority before I cast my 5-mana Convoke thing on turn 2. And the moment you cast a 5-mana Convoke thing on turn 2, the game is over. Just like largely, the games are very over. If you're playing a Venerated Loxodon and all of your 1-power creatures randomly now have 2 power, and then your opponent plays their Blood Tithe Harvester, you're super far ahead of them. If you are playing Knight Errant Devios, you're digging 6 cards deep to find Goblin Bushwhacker, Burning Tree Emissary. And you already have 5 creatures in play. So games that you convoke a 5-drop in play on turn 2, you are, I would say, reasonably 90% to win. And so when I first picked up the deck, it just we couldn't lose with it. No one's pushing Thraben Inspector, and you just get to crush the entire format. Then a couple days later, people that were good figured out, oh yeah, you just push the Thraben Inspector, and now it's a, not 90-10 matchup, it's a, 55-45, maybe 60-40, much more reasonable. And then a couple of days after that, the people that could not figure out the play patterns resolved their issues with the deck by just playing sideboard hate cards main deck. Things that are good against the deck are Wraths, So the, most playable ones generically were Deafening Clarion, maybe Extinction Event. Those are cards that sometimes end up in your main deck, not on accident. In testing, I was running into End the Festivities main, Hidetsugo, Destroys All. The one that is actually best against the deck is Settle the Wreckage, because Settle the Wreckage, you have to be in the combat step. And so not only does it blow up your entire board, but it also stops random Bushwhacker nonsense from killing you. And by the way, the decks playing Settle the Wreckage are also playing Temporary Lockdown and Supreme Verdict and Farewell. These aren't instead of each other. These are in addition to. I did run into a game where I got Wrath 6 times in 7 turns, and we did not win that one. So people, preparing for this event became very, very hostile to the, as people were calling it, red-white Hogaak deck. It's just an aggro deck. It's not any better than that. It's not resilient like Hogaak was. It's way worse at mulliganing than Hogaak ever was. Sometimes you would, in game 1 against Hogaak, play Leyline of the Void, and that would still not be good enough. If you play main deck Hidetsugo and End the Festivities and all those other things, yeah, you can beat this deck if you really want to, So a couple of our guys, because of that exact reason of not getting reasonable testing done, actually said, I can't get any online testing with red-white. I can't get any testing with the other decks because no one's deck list right now on Moto is reasonable because they're just all trying to kill this red-white thing. I'm just going to play the deck that I knew, 3 weeks ago. So we fielded, some Grease Fang, some Mono Green, some Blue-White Control. Everything was very playable in this event. The only thing I told people to steer away from was Black-Red Midrange, the deck that was by far the most represented thing. It just feels like everyone, when they know you're a Fatal Push Thoughtseize deck, because this is actually an open deck list tournament, you don't get the, I'm going to mulligan to see if I can have a great opening hand if someone knows that you're playing the midrange deck, Bad 7s are kept instead of going to 6 when you're playing a deck that's Fatal Push, Thoughtseize, Sheoldred, So you lose a lot of percentage points there, and playing mirror matches all day was something that I thought was not going to be super fun. So other than that, though, the Pioneer format is very, very open. The gameplay might not be everyone's favorite, but it is an incredibly well-balanced format right now.
So I've got a snapshot here in front of us of the Pioneer metagame from May 19th through May 28th. This is from Frank Karsten, who writes an amazing column over on the mothership called Metagame Mentor. So he compiled results just from Premier tournaments over a 10-day span. So this was about a week before the US Regional Championship. About 500 deck lists are represented in this sample, and he uses some interesting calculations to give what he calls the weighted metagame percentage, where each win is worth more later in the tournament. So it gives you a snapshot of what you might expect to see on day 2 of a big event. And I think it looks about like what you're describing, where Rakdos is by far the most popular, most represented deck. He has it at 19.7%, followed by Mono Green Devotion at 11.8, so that's your elves into Karn. Azorius Control, 7.6, and I'd heard mixed things about this deck over the past month or so, with some people swear by it, others point out tournaments where it just has an absolutely abysmal conversion rate. It is one of those decks that could very easily, like you're saying, bring in all the rest, take out your laydown arms, convert them to temporary lockdowns, and have a great day on Magic Online against the red-white aggro players, but I was not clear, at least from the snapshot, like how strong this deck really is. Greasefang at 6.6% is the 4th most popular, and then Boros Convoke, new to the format, but the 5th most popular deck during this stretch of time. Rounding out the top 10, Lotus Field, Is It Creativity, Mono White Humans, Rakdos Sack, and Azorius Spirits. So just looking at this, Lawson, does this more or less match your assessment of like how strong these decks are, or is this more of the case where some of these are popular, but you would definitely steer clear of them?
No, I think this is pretty right on with what's going on. I think the decks that I would say are a little underrepresented from this data set. The big ones to me, and this might come as a surprise because this is a deck that you might not be thinking about. I think Rakdos Sack is a phenomenal deck right now in the format. It's actually the only deck that put 2 copies into the top 8 of the event this past weekend. It's chilling at a casual 4.7% of the metagame in this snapshot. Other decks that I think are really, really powerful, the Neoform Atraxa deck, as we're going to talk about a little bit later on, I think is a phenomenal deck choice. And then one that is incredible to me that it's so slept on, Goblins. Goblins was the deck that I told people, if you wanted to play something that is spicy and out of left field, the thing that I was kind of the most excited about, and it's 0.4% of the Pioneer metagame from Frank Karsten's evaluation. The event that happened this weekend actually also has all of their statistics and for all of the decks in the field, and they are incredibly close to these numbers. Rakdos Midrange was 21% of the field. It was Green Devotion was 11%. And then the surprising one to me was Is It Creativity playing Gear Hulk was 7.5% of the field. I will say, and this is something to keep in mind if anyone listening to this is someone that's going to be playing in one of these larger events, every person who's playing in this event had to win a tournament to get here. These are all very established Magic players. Established Magic players are going to want to play decks that give them agency, and you have choices, Classic, I want to be smart, let me play Thoughtseize, let me play Counterspells, let me do X, let me do Y, let me not play Goblin Guide, Like that's a very common thing that, people want to feel like their actions matter, and the choices they're making all throughout the day are what got them to win. A lot of these decks are decks that, mid-range and Is It Creativity specifically are the I'm a smart person, let me play this deck. I think they're fine choices. Not to, be negative on the deck itself, or if that's someone's yum, I'm not going to yuck that for you, but I think they are a little overrepresented.
So you could not convince these players to sleeve up the Foundry Street denizens and the Legion loyalists and the conspicuous snoops.
I've tried to do it before in the past. I've tried in the past to, get 7-time Pro Tour players to, no, this is why Rift Bolt's good this week. And they're like, no, I'm not. You can't make me. You can't make me.
Well, given what you just said about your relative assessment of these decks, let's just scroll down here and take a look at this matrix of matchup win rates from specifically the Dreamhack Dallas. On the one hand, this is just one tournament, but it is fairly large, right? Like you're saying, this is a 1,200 player tournament. Everyone there had already qualified by winning another tournament. This is a pretty cutthroat, high-level event. Of the top 10 decks, the ones that I just named off, which one came out on top in terms of match win rate against the non-mirror? Well, we have Azorius Spirits and Rakdos Sacrifice. Those were the two best performing decks, each winning 57% of their matchups against decks other than the mirror match. Mono Green came in third at 54%, Mono White Humans at 53.4%, Greasefang in fifth. And from there, we get down to decks that were performing at 50% or lower. That's Blue White Control, Enigmatic Incarnation, Lotus Field at 49%, Boros Convoke in 8th spot there at just 47% win rates. Rakdos, by far the most popular deck in the field, only managed a 47% win rate, and Creativity was the worst of them all at 45. Am I reading that right? 45?
Yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah, you are reading that correctly. You are.
What happened?
So first I do want to start with Boros Convoke, because I know this is the hotness of the format going on right now. When we look at the matrix on it, there are basically every deck, it has a negative win rate against, except for two things. It is a positive win rate against exactly two decks. The positive win rate it was having was Lotus Field Combo, just like the combo deck that can't win the game on turn 4 is dying to the deck that's attacking for 12 on turn 3. News at 11. Those two decks just are never going to match up well for the Lotus Field deck. So, of course, Boros just farms them all day. That's awesome. And the other one, which will surprise people, is Rakdos Midrange. The deck that a lot of people would play to try to beat Convoke is the a million removal spells, Sheoldred deck. But because of that, every single Boros player was main decking hate against the Rakdos deck. So for anyone who hasn't played the red-white deck, there's kind of a stock 56-ish cards in the deck. And the most important thing that's going on is, what are we playing on turn 1?
Mm-hmm.
Most of the turn 1 plays, there's the 8 1-drop creatures that make an artifact. So it's going to be Thraben Inspector, Valdir and Epicure. There's going to be 4 Gleeful Demolitions, so that's 12. And then you want to have between 4 and 6 other 1-drop creatures. Just so you have the mass amount to be convoking a 5-drop into play on turn 2. Off of a Gleeful Demolition or an Ornithopter or 2, or, some combinations of these things. And a lot of people's go-to thing in this position was Giant Killer. Giant Killer is a 1-drop that taps for Convoke on turn 1, but if you have other 1-drops going on in your hand, you just don't have to play it. And then it's a thing that can kill, it can kill Sheoldred, it can kill Atraxa, it can kill Greasefang, because a lot of times in the Greasefang matchup, them hitting you for 13 and making some angels actually isn't good enough if that's all that's going to happen. You can sometimes push through enough damage that next turn, but you need to be able to take a blocker or 2 off the field. If you have, Giant Killer, go to combat, smash you, that can be enough to get through there. So there were just all of these random Giant Killers main deck, and then a lot of the sideboards had the big way to turn that black-red matchup positive is, it's a Collective Endurance, I believe is the magic card.
Collective Effort.
Collective Effort, thank you.
It's got Escalate, where you can tap creatures to escalate it for more modes. I believe it's from Eldritch Moon.
Yes, so it is one of those cards that for the longest time, people could not figure out how to make it work outside of exactly standard, where it also wasn't super popular. It has 3 modes, just like Collective Brutality, the one that most people know. So its escalate cost is you have to tap an untapped creature you control, which is very good in this deck. We've got a lot of creatures just hanging out, so that's a super easy thing to check off. All right, so mode 1 is destroy target creature with 4 power. So in the black-red matchup, that is Sheoldred. Destroy target enchantment feels like it's a throwaway. It's really not, because Fable of the Mirror Breaker is the best card in the black-red deck. So it's awesome that you can blow it up before they get to their backside of it. And then putting a counter on each of your guys is also insane in a deck that is making a lot of guys, you know? So plenty of red-white decks were playing 2 or 3 collective efforts in addition to having 3 or 4 giant killers in the main. When you have 7 things that say destroy target Sheoldred against your opponent's deck that has 3 copies of Sheoldred, you're going to win that battle, you know? And because of that, the red-white decks just farmed that matchup all weekend. And it wasn't remotely close. So other than that, though, everyone came ready for a red-white. Like, people knew that deck was going to be able to do scary things if you were not ready for it. So people, you know, made sure not to be embarrassed.
I saw an amazing picture on Twitter of somebody casting what was called the greatest collective effort of all time. And they had tapped 2 creatures to exile a Atraxa, Praetor's Voice, and a Fable the Mirror Breaker, and just clear their opponent's board. So leave them with absolutely nothing, and pump their entire team by 1 for their troubles.
I saw one blow up a temporary lockdown.
Oh my gosh.
That had 5 creatures underneath it, and then they kicked a Bushwhacker to give all of them haste and killed them. And I was just like, yeah, that's well played. You know, like, that card has so many words on it. Yeah, like.
So a card like that is able to swing the Rakdos Midrange matchup back into positive, but all the rest of the matchups came up in the red. Now, did that match your experience in testing? Do you feel like the field overcorrected for this deck, given how it didn't really do that well, or is this just a direct, if you play hate, it's going to suffer?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people's feeling towards Pioneer recently, unless you are a diehard Pioneer person, is, you know, the format's not super interesting. You know, I'll play a deck that does a powerful thing, and I'll do what I can at the event, you know? But when a deck pops up 3 weeks before your, you know, giant tournament that you're flying across the country for, and people are automatically calling it Hogaak Part 2, you're going to do a little bit of homework to, hey, how do I play this matchup, you know? And, you know, where people kind of have an idea about, like, what things you should think about against playing against, like, Mono Green Devotion, you know, try and interact with Llanowar Elf, because that card can be problematic in the early game. Like, those are general tips that people, like, remember in their head. But, like, I knew people that don't play very much Constructed that were like, here are the 7 cards that I'm bringing in against this red-white deck, and I'm changing these 1 or 2 things whether I'm on the play or the draw. And then I could ask them, awesome, cool, what matchups other than this red-white deck do you change your sideboarding when you're on the play or the draw? They'd be like, oh, I'm not sure. I just know the red-white one. And you're just like, okay, cool. You've prepared for this matchup. Good for you. Have fun.
Speaking of Llanowar Elf, this is off topic from the red-white deck, but there was a very interesting tweet from a player named Bobby Fortinelli. He's a East Coast grinder on the SCG Tour, expert in the Mono Green Devotion deck. And what he said in this tweet was, as a Mono Green player, his record against Lotus Field specifically is 27-4 in his last however many weeks. And he feels like it's almost a deterministic kill. Like, you should beat the Lotus Field deck as a Mono Green player almost every time. And he said Lotus player combos agree. And yet the Lotus Field deck usually wins because the Mono Green players are misplaying the matchup. So when you see something like that, it's like, really? Could that be true? And I'm just looking at the matchup matrix here from Dreamhack, and wouldn't you know it, but Mono Green Devotion went 47% against Lotus Field. They didn't have Bobby Fortinelli's tips. Like, it was shocking to see this tweet combined with this matchup matrix. Do you know what I'm talking about, Lawson?
I do know what you're talking about. I had a buddy of mine playing Mono Green play against Lotus Field 4 times, and he beat it all 4 times. I'll give away the secret. You can bring in cards from your sideboard even though you're a Karn deck. I know that sounds really weird, but Stonebrain is really, really good against the Lotus Field deck. And when it's an open decklist tournament, you just, like, you know exactly what things they can do. And so you just, like, can mulligan for Stonebrain in game 2.
So that's what I thought the advice was going to be, but it's actually even more specific than that.
Okay.
I'll put a link to the tweet in the show notes, but I think it's also on Fireshoes' Twitter feed. Bobby Fortinelli, that's the player's name. So he says that all you have to do is the following things. You mulligan for an elf and a Karn. You give yourself at least 2 hands to find this, sometimes 3. You get to play Karn on turn 3, and then you're going to do the following sequence. Your first Karn is going to put the Damping Sphere into your hand. Your second Karn activation on your next turn, when you have 5 mana, is going to get the Pithing Needle. Well, depends. If they have the Lotus Field in play, you get the Pithing Needle. If they don't have the Lotus Field in play, you just get Stone Brain and the game is immediately over. Stone Brain takes out the Lotus Fields, that's game. But assuming that they've already have a Lotus Field in play, which they probably do, you have to do a different sequence. And this is where he says most of these matchups are lost. Like, they forget to account for Otawara. So most players know that, okay, you play the Pithing Needle first, name Boseiju, and then play your Damping Sphere. But what they don't do is they do not leave 2 mana available so that if the Lotus Field player has Otawara in their hand, of which they play several copies, you have to leave yourself enough mana to replay the Damping Sphere on that same turn, which you have enough mana to do because, again, this is your 4th turn, you have your Elf plus 4 lands. So you have enough to go Pithing Needle first, Damping Sphere, and still have 2 mana left over to replay Damping Sphere if it gets bounced during the main phase. The Lotus Field player has to do the Otawara right then because their Lotus Field is going to shrink from a 3 mana to a 1 mana as soon as the Damping Sphere hits. So they have to float the mana then and Otawara right away. You replay Damping Sphere and that's game. He says if you do that, you will go 27-4 against Lotus Field. If you don't do that, if you screw it up, if you just like try to save mana by spending your 2 mana something else, play an extra elf that turn, you get Otawara and you just lose. You go from a win to a loss just like that.
I've got one more hot one for that matchup. Probably around 35-ish% of the green decks have a 1-of Shadow Spear in the sideboard as a way to gain a bunch of life in the mid game. If you have Shadow Spear in your sideboard, you can go get Shadow Spear in the matchup because it takes away the hexproof nature of Lotus Field, and then you can Boseiju Lotus Field, which I saw happen twice from my buddy, and that's good living. That's because the sacrifice trigger is still in the stack. You know, you still have to sack 2 lands, even though your Lotus Field is, you know, it turns into a basic. You know, the Boseiju gives you 1 land to sacrifice for it, but the troll takes his toll no matter what. So
very nice. All right, so that's a little bit off topic from what we were talking about. But anything else in this matchup matrix, Lawson, that's jumping out at you? Whether about Boros specifically or about any of these other top 10 decks?
The only other one that I think is like kind of interesting is kind of looking at Azorius Spirits. You know, it's the deck that had the highest win rate. So I do think it's important to kind of look at the things that it was doing well and the things that it was doing not so well. And it's kind of simple. But at the end of the day, Azorius Spirits. Azorius Spirits, the best card on the deck is Spell Queller. When Spell Queller is eating a magic card and then really hard to target because of rattle chains and because of other kind of taxing effects, it is a really, really powerful effect. And a lot of the decks that have really powerful 4-drops that you are kind of hoping make it onto the board are a little bit worse when they don't make it onto the board. You know, they get an 83% win rate against 5-color Enigmatic Incarnation. Fires and Enigmatic are both 4-drops, so getting those Spell Quellered is really brutal. You know, Abzan Greasefang. Abzan Greasefang is built on a card called Greasefang that's a 3-drop that gets Spell Quellered, you know? Like, there's a lot of ways that it can go wrong. The Greasefang matchup is also additionally brutal because a bunch of these spirits decks are now playing a spirit that lets you tap 2 of your spirits to tap target creature as a way to combat the Convoke deck. If you just tap your opponent's creatures during their upkeep, they can't Convoke with them. So because of that, there is a lot of extra random hate for Greasefang. If you just tap their Greasefang before the trigger happens, they don't get to crew the vehicle with the Greasefang, so you're like much less in danger of like Parhelion and all of that stuff. So Spirits is a deck that like lined up really well.
Yeah, that's Shacklegeist, which you'll typically see 4 copies in most Spirits, both mono blue and blue white.
Mm-hmm.
If you're feeling really bold, you can even let the Greasefang trigger resolve and then just tap the vehicle. Then they have to put the Parhelion back in their hand, but they don't get to attack with it. So it's just like the perfect card against Greasefang. I actually had not thought about its applications against Convoke. It's a little bit counterintuitive, right? Because if I'm paired against aggro, how can I spend 2 creatures just to tap 1 Thraben Inspector?
Mm-hmm.
But I guess, Lawson, you're saying if that's the difference between locks it on this turn or no locks it on this turn, then that could be game winning.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, so I think Spirits just lined up really, really well for the format. Yeah, it's just like it is a very powerful deck that is aggressive and, kills people quickly.
All right, so that's the most popular decks, but there are a few that you picked out in particular that you want to highlight. So I'm going to turn over to you here. Guide me through these.
Absolutely. So I think the most important place to start is what was the thing that was the most powerful. And the thing that was the most powerful during this weekend was Elliot Raff's Enigmatic Fires deck. I did get to sit down with him after the event. I was hanging out with some of his buddies. And we went pretty in-depth on kind of why the deck felt good, what was going on there. And the first thing to know about it is a Karuga companion deck. So we're not playing anything small here. I asked him, what are we scared of? And he went 1-drops. So I got a lot of things that are good against 1-drops. His main deck has got, some temporary lockdowns in the main. His enigmatic, can go get some really scary cards for those really aggressive beatdown decks. Tulsamir making you a wolf, gaining you some life, killing a guy, Dragon Lord Atarka, killing a bunch of guys, Atraxa, drawing a bunch of cards. Like, this deck does a lot of scary things as long as it hasn't died. And at the end of the day, when the deck that is 20% of the room is trying to be a mid-range deck and, win the game with a 4/5 that, is basically Siege Rhino. Sheoldred is just a modern-day Siege Rhino. We can be honest. When one player's option is a 4/5 with Death Touch that does some damage every couple of turns, and the other guy has a Coma and a Atraxa in play, I'm going to put my money on the Coma, Elliot, he went undefeated in the event. He started off 12-0. He took 2 draws to make it into the top 8. He lost in the first round of the top 8 and told me this really funny thing at dinner afterwards. He lost more games in the top 8 of the tournament than he did in the Swiss of the tournament.
Oh my god.
In his 12 match wins, he 2-0'd all but one of them. So he had a single game loss through the Swiss portion of the event and picked up, 2 more in the top 8. So really, really fantastic showing. One thing that I will say that is important is most of these Fires decks that people have been playing are 80 card list, playing Yorion. He chose to play the 60 card Karuka version because if the most important card in your deck is Enigmatic Incarnation, playing 80 cards and still only getting 4 Enigmatic means you're playing less Enigmatic. So just play the 60 card deck that gets to have 4 of it.
Yeah, it's kind of taking the best parts of the Karuga Fires and the Yorion Enigmatics, both of which been around for a while. Of course, the Yorion Enigmatic has a much longer history. But if you're saying what I just need to do is be powerful and just go way over the top of Rakdos Midrange, you're giving yourself so many chances to just blow somebody out, right? So you can do your Enigmatic sacrificing your Leyline to get one of your 7-drops. You can go Enigmatic sacrificing your Fires to get a powerful 5. I see a Kenrith here. I see a Tulsamir to stabilize. We have Elish Norn, Mother of Machines. You can sacrifice one of your 3s. You have Fable of the Mirror Breaker, Touch the Spirit Realm, Temporary Lockdown. That can get Helia Radiant Dawn. This is one of your new 4-drops that allows you to go up the chain. Helia gives you your enchantment back, so you have another 3-drop for your hand, and it's still an enchantment creature. You can sack that to get a 5 next turn. In exchange for all that, right, you're just pretty slow, right? So it's a bit of a gutsy call by Elliot. He must have figured out that okay, people are going to get tired of these aggro decks, tired of losing with the one drop Boros deck, and are not going to register it in huge quantities. And I guess that's how it played out.
Yeah. No, I talked to him after one round. I think it was around like 7 or 8. He was playing against mono green, and the mono green deck activated Karin like 4 times in the game. But his coma made 12 tokens during the game. And 12 is more than 4. It was literally what his joke was. And it was like, yeah, that's a lot of snakes, you know? His opponent had never seen coma before, apparently. And he was like, oh, so you get one if you don't have one in play? It's like, no, I always get one. He's like, oh, you get one at the start of your turn? He goes, no, I get one both of our turns. And you're just like, yeah, like... That's tough, you know. That's not a card you want to learn about when it's entering play, you know. That's
The answer to both of your questions is yes, and I get even more snakes than that. So fantastic run from Elliot Raff, who's Raff Sputin online.
Oh, I didn't know that was him. Oh man, it's good to know. Next deck that I wanted to bring up, Dimir Rogues. Only reason why I wanted to bring up this deck, I think it is the little brother to Spirits when it comes to, you know, flying-based beatdown decks in the format. Dimir Rogues, there were 2 copies of it. I believe at 7-0 on day 1 that actually had to play in the mirror match. So there were 2 guys that were crushing the event with this deck. It is the aggro Fatal Push Thoughtseize deck, news at 11. I think the thing with this format, if you are going to be a deck that plays Fatal Push and Thoughtseize, you need to either be just playing the most powerful cards generically, which is going to be the black-red deck, or you need to find a way for your deck to capitalize and get to play one more powerful interaction spell. The Dimir Rogues deck gets to play Drown in the Lock, which is a very powerful magic card. It just means you need to have the ability to put cards in your opponent's graveyard. The most recent addition to this deck that was really, really impressive to me was Invasion of Amonkhet.
Yes.
On coverage, a deck that we're going to talk about a little bit later lost to Dimir Rogues when Dimir Rogues went Thoughtseize your Atraxa out of your hand, play Invasion of Amonkhet, attack the invasion, flip the invasion, copy your Atraxa, draw 5 cards, which is really powerful.
So Lawson, remind us what Invasion of Amonkhet does, because every time I mention this to David, I'm like, hey, Invasion of Amonkhet is doing really well. He says, you sure about that? Like, really? And I'm like, yes, it's really doing well. So he doesn't believe me, but I know you've been high on this card from day 1.
Oh, yeah, I love this card. It's my favorite card to draft in Limited. I've got a draft deck right now that I'm sitting on that's got 2 of them. So it's blue, black, and 1 for a battle with 4 loyalty, defense, whatever we want to call it, explosion points. Whenever it comes into play, your opponent discards a card, you draw a card, and each player mills 3. All of those words matter for this card. Of course, you know, drawing a card is always a giant benefit. It means it's automatically replacing itself. Making your opponent discard a card is putting you up card advantage. And then in this deck specifically, since it's doing the each player mill 3, that's just going to turn on your Rogue's Lord. It's going to turn on your Thieves Guild Enforcer. So, you know, there's a very real chance where, like, your board will go from, you know, 2 or 3 power to I play the Invasion of Amonkhet, I get some value from it immediately, and now, there's 8 cards in the graveyards. The rogues now have their additional benefit. You know, the Thieves Guild is getting +2/+1. Soaring Thought Thief is giving your team a global buff. And then the backside, Lazotep Convert is a 4/4 clone that's just copying the text and abilities of a creature in either player's graveyard. So that graveyard could be, you know, one of your own creatures that you've lost earlier in the game. It could be something that you either killed or Thoughtseized away from your opponent, or even sometimes the front side of the card does mill each player for 3. So sometimes you just like mill their big scary card into their graveyard, and then okay, cool. I guess I'm going to copy your Atraxa, or I'm going to copy your Elishnorn, and now I have an Elishnorn. You know, like there's just a lot of things that it can randomly become. You know, and because it has already replaced itself, we don't need to ask it to do very much, you know?
So Rogues has been making a little bit of a comeback. The concept of a rogue deck has been around ever since, you know, Zendikar Rising, when these new rogues got printed. But I never considered it a serious metagame threat. I'm surprised that you're picking it out as a deck that's well positioned here. Is it because of the invasion specifically, or just because of the way the metagame has ebbed and flowed?
It is, a lot of it is because of the way the format has ebbed and flowed. I think that Drown in the Loch is the most important card for the deck. The thing that I will say about Pioneer is, you know, you should be trying to do something really, really powerful. That should be your default thing that you're doing. And if you're not able to do something super powerful, you know, and when I say super powerful, I mean the red-white deck is putting 14 power into play on turn 2. The, you know, Rona combo decks are just killing your opponent from a board where you literally had no creatures in play at the beginning. There's a bunch of decks that can do some really, really powerful things very, very quickly. Trying to play, you know, 5-color Niv-Mizzet mid-range soup is just like not what this format's about, you know? And so if you are going to play any amount of interaction, the only good interaction spells in the format are Thoughtseize and Fatal Push, and that's not quite enough. So you need a little bit more. This is actually a really good segue to talk about the Neoform Atraxa deck. This is a deck that I know you talked about on the pod a while ago. Hooting Mandrills, Tassiger, these are 6-mana creatures with Delve. We love them for having two things. One, 6 CMC, or mana value, I should say, making it to where we can Neo4 them directly into an Atraxa. Or the other thing that they do is they turn on Stubborn Denial, so that you get to be a deck that has 1 mana negate. And that's a really big plus, you know? So these are the rules of engagement for the format to me, you know? If you're going to be interacting with your opponent at all, you need to have 10 to 12 really, really efficient spells that interact, and those spells need to be maximally efficient, because the threats are the interaction is not unless you build around it. So Brent Wagner, he's one of the actual hosts of the Painful Truce podcast, I think. He also works with MTG Rants. Really great guy. He was playing the deck. He, a while back, did really well at the Hunter Burton Memorial Open, playing it in the Pioneer side event. So yeah, the deck is really powerful as well, but it's mostly leaning on the fact that it gets to be a deck that has interaction and also be doing something really powerful.
Yeah, I'm encouraged to see this result from Brent. I know he's been on the deck since the beginning, since it first became a good deck. Mm-hmm. And I placed that moment in time slightly after I started playing it. Because we did a week on Atraxa right when the card was first previewed, and like our version 0.0 of just like Neoforming for Atraxa did not have Stubborn Denial. It made such a huge difference, because what kept happening is that, you know, you could get Atraxa into play fairly consistently, and sometimes you would still lose, right? You have to Atraxa, flip over your 10 cards, pass the turn. You know, if you're lucky, you hit a Thoughtseize, and you Thoughtseize and pass the turn. And sometimes you would still lose those games, but if you add Stubborn Denial to the equation, Neoform for an Atraxa with Stubborn Denial backup, which the Atraxa finds, that beats almost everything. It's extremely difficult to lose from that position. I still found ways to do it, but it's pretty rare.
I will say, and this is the thing that was probably a little bit less true when you were playing the deck and a little more true now. A lot of the black-red decks, to be better against red-white, their 2-mana removal spell of choice, because they do want it to be an instant, just in case there's like a Bushwhacker turn, has been Power Word Kill. Power Word Kill is the 2-mana, unconditional removal spell, except for the condition that it can't be like a demon or an angel or a dragon. But like, how many of those are really hanging out? Atraxa is a praetor, but she is also an angel, so she does not get got by Power Word Kill. So those decks actually have even fewer ways of efficiently dealing with the Atraxa than normal. So having Stubborn Denial is even better against them than it would be normally. So
yeah. If you do decide to pick this deck up, You will find that some things randomly beat you. um, like the Shacklegeist that Lawson mentioned can just beat you, like because if you can't block and get that lifelink off Atraxa, you might lose anyway. I noticed that Elliot Raff is playing the full 4 copies of Leyline of the Void in his sideboard because he's a Karuga deck. Now, that card used to see no play at all in Pioneer. When Atraxa first burst onto the scene, those decks did not play any cards at all in the 75 that could take out a black Leyline. Now, I see Brent has 2 cards. He has 1 Boseiju and looks like 1 Terra Sunder. But most likely Leyline is going to beat him as well. So that's the kind of thing where if the deck is off the radar, which I believe it's at about 1% metagame share right now, and you're a master of the deck, you could do really well with it.
Yeah. So I think that is a deck that some people are definitely sleeping on. At end of the day, I don't think, anyone's mind, I don't think it's going to be the next thing that breaks the format. But I do think it's important to, keep it in mind as a deck that does a powerful thing. And, if you're trying to play Stubborn Denial so that you can have good pieces of interaction, this is a way to do it. The Spirits deck, we didn't talk about it, but they play Curious Obsession so that they can play the counter spell that if you have a creature with flying and an enchantment in play, cost 1 mana. Like, that is a really, really powerful piece of interaction. The things you have to do to play it, the card is called a Geist Light Snare, are pretty egregious. You have to be willing to play Curious Obsession in your deck in a format that has Fatal Push and all of that. That is how bad the interaction is in the format. We're jumping through big hoops to play 1 mana efficient spells. So
I take your point, although I happen to think Geist Light Snare is like a beautiful card for the Spirits deck. Like, I think they're fine paying 2 for it. In most situations, it's still mana leak, and it's a god draw if you have 1 drop into Obsession with Geist Light backup. Okay, that still might lose to 2 Fatal Pushes, but maybe not.
Maybe not.
All right, so that's Neoform Atraxa.
So that's Neoform Atraxa. We've talked plenty on Boros Convoke. There's a lot to talk about with the deck. I could literally talk about it for probably 10-15 hours. The super quick and simple of the deck, if you are interested in picking up the deck, 1, do not play Gigantha. Gigantha is just like the worst possible card in your deck, even when it's in your sideboard. If you play a version that doesn't play Burning Tree Emissary because you're really scared about having cards that are bad to top deck like Burning Tree can be, that's fine. I mean, I would only play a deck that plays 4 Burning Trees in it myself, but if that's not something you're comfortable with, that's fine. Even if you meet the companion restriction for Gigantha, do not play it in your sideboard. Do not play Gigantha, even if it's free, because it is an 18 land deck. You cannot afford to ever spend 3 mana to put it into your hand. Even if there was the old companion rules of if it was just in your companion zone and you can spend 5 mana to put into play, that would still probably not be good enough. Turn 7 or 8, when the game has stalled out with your deck that has Ornithopters and all of these other things, playing a card with no text but is a 5/5 just isn't going to be good enough to win you the game. You are just giving away a sideboard slot. Max McVitie is the guy that did the best with the red-white deck this weekend. He's a long time Star City Games grinder. He was playing Gigantha. I did watch a decent number of his matches. He was not touching the companion zone. It is not good. You should play some cards that are really, really powerful. So I will get off my soapbox for Gigantha. This is just not a deck that he does stuff in. I'm so sorry to let people know.
I'm shocked to hear that. I mean, it just goes against all of the received wisdom about companions. What about against Rakdos, right? The game's going to go long. You could attack through their Bone Crusher Giant with your turn 8 Gigantha. That never happens?
The thing that happens against Black-Red when the game goes long is if Sheoldred gains more than 2 points of life, you're dead. You can't deal with both their Sheoldred and 4 extra points of life. That's just not really the way the deck plays out. You also can't really beat the black-red deck if their Fable the Mirror Breaker is making additional Blood Tithe Harvesters. You can't beat them if they're getting a million draws to find their first or second extinction event. Like, letting the games go long with the deck is a bad plan. I'm also a pretty big advocate to not be playing Wedding Announcement. It is the card that people want to bring in against Wrath of Gods. But in my deck that does a really, really powerful thing, Doomwake puts it really well. The best way to think about the red-white Convoke deck is Affinity. Just think about it like you would any Affinity deck. Affinity decks do not generically play grindy, late game, Howling Mine-esque effects, one-sided Howling Mine effects. Because when I play my whole hand on turn 2, I'm just hoping that my board presence is enough, If I turn 3 have 3 lands, which is not automatic in a deck that's playing 18 to 20 lands in it, if I play Wedding Announcement, which is the best turn it's going to come into play, is turn 3, and I add 1 power to the board, and I say go, I'm dead. I'm just you just lose. The deck is all about going fast. You should try to continue going fast. Slowing the deck down for to get grindy is a recipe for disaster.
So I do have 2 questions for you, Lawson. So in all your testing on Boros Convoke, I saw you trying out all kinds of wild cards in the 1 slot and sometimes in the 2 slot, because there are those flex plots.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from the Burning Tree Emissary question, there's also like, what's your last 1 drop? So what is your best recommendation, and what did the community consensus arrive at for those last slots?
So community consensus on the 1 drops that you can play that are not the ones that make artifacts or Gleeful Demolition. Giant Killer was the go-to, was the one seeing the most play. Legion's Landing was also pretty highly regarded. The one that I have been most impressed with is Kytheon. Kytheon is really impressive because, 1, in matchups where people are not wrathing your board, when it flips into a Planeswalker, it is then really hard to get off the board. If you can ever flip Kytheon before they get their Wrath on turn 3 or 4, then the moment they play their Wrath, you sometimes just have a moment where, oh cool, you Wrath of God me? I have a Burning Tree and a Bushwhacker in my hand. Burning Tree, turn on my Gideon, Bushwhack, attack you for 10. The turn after you Supreme Verdicted me. On turn 4 on the play. Like, that happens a decent amount with the deck. And so Kytheon was really, really impressive. There are a ton of weird ones that I have seen people play. There was an adventure creature that was a fairy that you could give something +2/+1 and flying. That I saw people test for a second as a way to have some additional reach with the deck. It was awful. Judge's Familiar was one that was actually kind of impressive when we were testing it. And a couple people were playing it. One, importantly, it's a creature with flying. The deck does not have any burn in it, so getting the last couple points of damage can sometimes be hard. If you have a Judge's Familiar and an Ornithopter that both have a counter on them from a Venerated Loxodon, sometimes that's enough to get the chip damage in. Also, the fact that you can use the Force Spike while it's tapped matters, so there are some things. The 2-drop slot is basically Burning Tree, I think, is the go-to must. And then there are some people that want to try very hard not to play Forbidden Friendship. I completely understand with not wanting to play Forbidden Friendship. For anyone who doesn't get the joke on why Forbidden Friendship is good in the deck, when you play Burning Tree Emissary on turn 2, because most of the creatures in your deck are actually white, you don't have a very good way of effectively using the Burning Tree mana on anything other than Burning Tree Emissary or Goblin Bushwhacker, or Reckless Bushwhacker, I should say. Forbidden Friendship is a 2-mana spell that uses red mana that puts a white token into play for Convoke. So that's the whole bit. It is a card that you can play off Burning Tree that's white for Convoke purposes. So there's a lot still for the deck to hash out. There's people that are on... Max McVitie was on Sheffet Dunes. A lot of people are on Castle Embereth. Some people are on Sukenzu and Den of the Bugbear. So there's a lot of little things still to get refined on the deck. But we have tested out what the 1s and 2-drops can be. A lot of them are really bad. So, stick to the ones that are seeing some play. I tried some decks that were Skrelv and Mox Amber and all of that. I think Doomwake's actually going to be playing some of those decks on stream. I pitched it to him, and he's pretty excited about those. So that's your teaser for Magic content in the next couple weeks. But this deck is super, super sweet. If you are interested in playing the deck, I think the hate is gone. I don't think people are trying to kill the baby in the crib before it grows up to be evil. But this deck has got a lot going on.
I see that Forge Devil has made it as a sideboard staple.
It's fantastic.
1-drop, the 1/1 pings you for 1 damage, and it pings any creature for 1 damage. Little devil there. And I see a Regal Leosaur, 1 main, 1 side, in Max McFadie's list.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating.
Real quick on Forge Devil, it's insane in the mirror match because it takes a piece of cardboard off your opponent's board, so it makes their Convoke a lot harder to do. Also, anytime that you play a card in this deck that does not tap for Convoke, it is way harder to Convoke things on turn 2, and that's the whole bit. That's all we want to do, That's the entire story, Forge Devil is also insane against Mono Green. If you win game 1 against Mono Green, and then when they're on the play in game 2, and they go Llanowar Elf, and you go, okay, Forge Devil, kill it. That is a game that is a lot harder for them to win. And, being able to win games on the draw in Pioneer is, something that people have been asking for a long time. So that's a good way to do it.
Speaking of mono green, the next deck I see here is mono green. Looks like a last chance qualifier winner.
Yes, Mr. Everett, also known as Aspiring Spike. I joked with him when he qualified before he made any post. I asked him if he's going to change his Twitter name from Aspiring Spike to just, Aspiring Pro or whatever. He has now changed it to just Spike. So I'm happy to see that he has taken the moniker. The deck is really good. It has really powerful draws. This is the deck that if your opponent does not respect it, you get to kill them. Polychronos was a huge addition to the deck. Not only does it help you be good at having a lot of devotion, it also shores up a lot of your kind of clunky matchups in the fact that it has reach, so it's really good at stopping the Spirits deck. And then something that is not immediately apparent to people, Polychronos is actually the best card for the green deck against the red-white deck, because when you flip Polychronos, it doesn't need to block. You just attack with it, and you gain 6, and then it's way harder to lose the game.
Yeah, so big congrats to Aspiring Spike, or just Spike. He's qualified for the Modern Pro Tour. I think everyone's very excited to see what he brings for that. That's coming up in Barcelona. His list is quite clean.
Mm-hmm.
4 copies of Kiora Behemoth Beckoner. Don't cut your 4th Kiora. 3 copies of Pelucranos, and that's it. There's no more flex slots left. That's the entire deck.
Yep. No, really, really impressed with the run that he had. Something I do want to tell people about Polychronos that is not immediately apparent. It is not worded like Wormcoil Engine. It's not when this creature dies. It's a tribal effect. This came up against me in testing. My opponent made 12 mana with Nykthos, and they flipped their Polychronos, and then they played Polychronos from their hand, and then they played another Polychronos, which seemed weird because it legend ruled. But the backside of Polychronos, when it becomes the Engine of Ruin, says whenever a Hydra dies under your control, that's not a token, create a 3/3 reach and a 3/3 lifelink token. And so he just turned the 2 Polychronos into his hand into a 4/5 and 2 3/3s, and now was comfortably able to attack me for 6, gain 6, and I was very, very dead. So, if you're interested, Polychronos can do some really, really unfair things. I know if I had given my opponent one more turn, he could have just flipped the one that was in play. It would have legend ruled, and it would have triggered from itself and the other one, making 4 tokens.
That's
So
gross. That's so
yeah,
gross.
yeah, we were really dead that game. Not kind of dead, super dead.
Yeah, the deck also plays Lair of the Hydra, which becomes a Hydra. Now, you're not allowed to set X equal to 0, so don't get too fancy with it.
Something you can do with it that is kind of funny is you can attack with it as like a 5/5, and then if it gets jump blocked, if you need to get the tokens, you can activate it a second time to make it a 1/1, and then it dies to state-based actions. So,
Oh my gosh, that's nasty.
yeah. Yeah. Woof.
All right, so that's mono green.
Yes. And then final deck that I want to talk about real quick. This is the only deck that I was telling people that if you wanted to play something that was off the beaten path, I love this deck. Rakdos Goblins. Really aggressive, really just try to put your opponent from 20 life to 0 life. The thing that I like about this deck is, one, it gets to play Goblin Chain Whirler, and it's not ruining its mana base. It's not doing anything else. Like, it's playing it because it's a Goblin tribal deck, and having Goblin Chain Whirler in a format where I expected a lot of people to be playing green, and a lot of people to be playing spirits, and a lot of people to be playing the Convoke deck, like, that is a really powerful card. And then the reason why it's Rakdos is actually so it can play Touch of Moonglove and call the Death Dweller. Now, these are not Magic cards that I expect literally any person on the planet to know off the top of their head. I'll start with Touch of Moonglove because it's very straightforward. 1 black mana, instant from Origins. Target creature gets +1/+0, gains Death Touch until end of turn. And whenever a creature dealt damage by that creature dies, its controller loses 2 life. If you combo this with Goblin Chain Whirler, it kills all of your opponent's creatures, and then they take 2 damage for each one. So if you're playing against Boros and it's turn 4, you kill 7 or 8 creatures and they take 14. The game is over. On the spot. Immediately. We're done. And then, actually, the better card in the deck, it was funny enough, Call of the Death Dweller. Kind of similar. Black and 2 sorcery. Return up to 2 target creature cards with total mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Put a Death Touch counter on either of them, then put a Menace counter on either of them. This works the exact same way with Chain Whirler. If there's ever a Chain Whirler in your graveyard, you can just reanimate it. It has Death Touch, and it kills everything. This deck also is playing a bunch of 1-drop goblins that whenever they die, deal damage equal to their power to anything. So this deck randomly is also really good at dealing with Sheoldred. You know, you can attack, and when your opponent block and kills your thing, all right, well, I'm going to touch the Moonglove. It now has Death Touch, and your guy randomly died. Also, you know, it had a dies trigger, you know, or I'm going to give my Fanatical Firebrand, I'm going to reanimate it with Call of the Death Dweller, and I'm going to put the Death Touch counter on my thing that can just ping something down. So this is the deck that I was telling people, if you want to play something off the beaten path, this deck does really powerful things and can win out of nowhere. So
yeah, this Rakdos version is not what I was expecting. It's placing a lot more emphasis on these 1 damage effects, right? Not just Fanatical Firebrand, but also the Fireblade Charger and the Cacophony Scamp. You have the Stork Prospector, so you can just pop those off whenever you need to. They work well with the Call of Death Dweller and the Touch of Moonglove, of course, along with the Chain Whirler. Where Chain Whirler, these cards are replacing some of the more explosive goblins. Like, you know, I just assumed that you would have to play the Foundry Street Denizen. That's the one that gets a +1/+0 for every red creature that comes into play. And maybe, I don't know, more Lords. You could play War Chiefs or something in the 3 slot, but Chain Whirler is a little bit of a heavier creature. Envisioning that you're going to have to interact and take things off the battlefield, that you're not just going to run roughshod over everybody. It can still do the Goblin thing, right? You can still go off with Prospector and Snoop and Runevelt Hordemaster. So it's a true Goblin engine after Mord's Heart, but it's got some interesting skills with the black, and then you get to play the great sideboard disruption, Thought Seizes, Leyline of the Voids, Fatal Push.
The other interesting thing about this deck that is not immediately apparent, It has a different combo than the traditional Snoop combos where you play Horde Master and you make a lot of value and all of that. The funny thing that this deck can do is that in addition to having 4 Horde Master and Hobgoblin Bandit Lord, the Battlecry Goblin being able to pump the power of all of your guys, you can turn your creatures that aren't Fireblade Charger and Cacophony Scamp into mana, then turn all of that mana into pumping your team. So if you had like a couple goblins in play, you could sack them, get up to like 8 mana, pump 8 mana into giving all your guys +4/+0, and then now your Scamp and your Charger have 5 power each. You can now sack them to Skirk Prospector and just hit your opponent in the head for 10. So this deck also has burn combos to it that are not immediately apparent, and having those guys also combo really well with, like I said earlier, the Call of the Death Dweller and Touch of Moonglove by being random things that ping stuff and can get Death Touch is like very, very reasonable. You kill Skirk Prospector in this deck on sight, no matter what. I don't know if you've read this book yet, but that card is never doing something fair. Kill it with fire.
All right, so those are some decks that did well at the Dreamhack Dallas. Before we close, there is one last deck that we have to talk about because it's so sweet and it's the talk of the town right now. Talking about the new Pioneer Splinter Twin, or perhaps the new Dimir Inverter, depending on which hype you believe. Archfiend of the Dross. Beautiful, beautiful card. It's Phyrexian Demon, Scourge of limited formats. This is one that David had his eye on from right when Phyrexia All Will Be One was initially previewed, because he thought, oh, this would be a great way to make this Demonic Pact Harmless Offering deck a little bit stronger. And he put together a list. I think we talked about it, a month or two ago. He tried it. I mean, it didn't quite work, but the idea was, boy, Archfiend of the Dross, it's this gigantic beater. It's 2 black, 6/6 flying demon. So 6/6 flying for 4. Huge. It even deals damage to your opponents whenever their creatures die. They lose 2 life per creature. So it's just this massive battlefield dominating threat that also has combo potential. What's supposed to happen is you're supposed to lose oil counters every turn. If you run out of oil counters, you die. But if you donate the Archfiend to your opponent, which was what David was trying to do, they might die. So that was like the concept, and it wasn't that good. But it turns out we just completely blanked on the real hotness. So Lawson, talk to me about the Metamorphic Alteration.
I'm more than happy to. So Metamorphic Alteration, I'm going to read the card out for y'all because when you first look at it, you might have an idea of what we're trying to do with it. But Metamorphic Alteration, sorry, I have to pull it up real quick because I thought I had it off the top of my head, but it is a very, very strange card. Metamorphic Alteration is a aura, so you put it on a creature, and then the creature that it comes into play enchanted to becomes a copy of another chosen creature. So it's a weird kind of clone for a blue and 1. And so the combo in this sense is you can play an Archfiend, which is a giant 6/6 creature that holds off your opponent's board really well. You can't just beat down through this thing. And so your opponent's creatures kind of get stuck in purgatory on the board. And then when you cast your Metamorphic Alteration, instead of putting it on your creature, you actually put it on their creature, and you choose that their Thraben Inspector, Shealdred, Fable of the Mirror Breaker token is now an Archfiend of the Dross. Go. And because if you do this to someone who's tapped out, they never get priority until the beginning of their upkeep, where they have been asked to remove this oil counter from this thing that does not have an oil counter on it, and they just kind of die. And that's all she wrote. Yeah, it is.
This is brilliant.
It is brilliant. The other thing that it does that is very innocuous at first, that I did see come up multiple times, is you can turn your opponent's good creature into a bad creature. Like I saw this turn a Sheoldred into a Blood Tithe Harvester. Not to say Blood Tithe Harvester is not a good Magic card, but it is definitely nowhere near as good as you know, as Sheoldred, you know? And so it's also like a weird kind of removal spell in that case. Mostly we're using it so that we can, 2-card combo kill someone. But yeah, super, super sweet. There was only one guy playing this deck at the event, and he was at the top 10 tables, clearing up day one. So I did not keep up with how his event ended up. I'm assuming since we're not asking for it to get banned immediately, he did not end up crushing it, but it definitely was a sweet, sweet list.
Yeah, this player is CFTSOC. CFTSOC, who is a Magic Online grinder and brewer. Went 7-3 on day one. I did not follow up to see how his tournament finished up. He put this into what is otherwise like a Grixis mid-range shell. So 4 Archfiends main deck, 3 Metamorphic Alterations main deck. That's your inverter combo, where the Archfiend is pretty good by itself. Metamorphic Alteration also has its uses, just like Lawson is describing. Surround that with good mid-range cards. There are 4 dig-through times here, which become a lot more impressive when you're digging for this very hard to interact with 2-card combo. Now, the question on everyone's mind is, how did this combo just come out of nowhere, right? Did we all just like totally miss on this? And a few things are going on in the background here. So one is that, okay, Archfiend, people don't immediately think that is playable. I know some people ended up putting it into their Rakdos decks just as like a good card for the weekend. I know Bomac Courier, Matt Camo, friend of the podcast, ended up playing 1 main and I think 2 or 3 more in his sideboard and just stock Rakdos. So it's a known good card, the Archfiend, in that respect, but I've never seen anyone put Alteration on it. And it turns out that the card is just bugged on Magic Online. Like, you actually cannot execute the combo currently. I don't know which card is broken, but it just doesn't do anything. It's very, very sad. And it turns out that CFT SOC had put out a cryptic tweet in mid-March, and the tweet says something like, I think I just broke Pioneer with this broken combo and the dang thing doesn't work at all on Magic Online. But I'm not going to say what it is in case I decide to play it in a tournament someday.
That's amazing.
We all just forgot about it, and now here it is. Early June, he's finally unveiled the beast, and it's beautiful. It's like in Zoolander when he finally unveils Magnum, and we're all in tears.
Wow. So it was funny because I, since I was at the event wearing a suit and had, my note-taking device with me, I think people thought that I was coverage, they thought that I was with the event, and I had one guy pull me aside, and I think this was probably around 8 or so, and they were like, have you seen what CFT SOC's wearing or what he's playing? And I was like, I don't know who that is. I had no clue. I was just standing around. He like pulled me aside. He's like, he's playing a Metamorphic Alteration with Archfiend of the Dross. And I was like, I don't know what that means. Like I just there's like, I know Archfiend of the Dross. That's a limited all-star. As a limited connoisseur myself, this guy's a nightmare. And Metamorphic Alteration. Yeah, I have 4 copies of it on Arena, because, whatever, you draft enough. But yeah, no, I did not put 2 and 2 together. I did see one time he did put Metamorphic Alteration on his own creature, copying Archfiend of the Dross, and then just killing his opponent because he has 2 6/6s with flying, and then played a Fatal Push or something, and his opponent just died because, this card can't be left in play. The black-red decks that are playing it in the sideboard, it's a sideboard option against other black-red decks because they only let you register for Sheoldred, so this is like Sheoldred 5 and 6 for those decks post-board to just like, I would like a big, meaty 4-mana thing that says die or answer, Yeah,
that play you just described, that's 12 damage in the air, 2 Archfiends attacking, and then the Fatal Push does another 4 damage just for killing their creature. So it's easy to see you are just suddenly dead. I'm really excited to see what happens with this combo. It's a damn shame that it's bugged right now. I know that our Pioneer contingent in the Faithless Brewing Discord is hard at work on this right now. We're wondering maybe you can just cut the red. Maybe this should play more like classic Inverter. This is such a sweet interaction. And yeah, I'd love to see where it goes.
Absolutely. But those are the decks of Pioneer that were super, super exciting to me. I do want to have just like a quick talk about like competitive Magic, because, being that I worked with so many guys that worked really hard to be at this tournament, to qualify for a Magic tournament is difficult. You had to win an event to get here. This was not a small event. You had to play 14 rounds of Magic to finish the tournament. You had to go 6-3 to day 2 against other people whose average match win percentage against Joe Schmoes and, local grinders is like 60%. You needed to have a 66% win rate against guys with 60% win rates. Most people are not going to day 2. They spent 11 hours playing Magic because the event had technical issues and MTG Melee was not ready for a 1,200 person tournament. And at one point, the lights died on us. We're going to disregard that for 15 minutes. You had to crush this event. And if you did go 6-3 to make it to day 2, if you wanted to make it onto the Pro Tour, you had to come in the top 48. If you had gone 6-3 on day 1, you had to go 4-0-1 to make the Pro Tour. So now that you've done this Herculean task, all I'm asking you to do is 5-0 this league or no Barcelona. That is what they were asking to make it to the next step. So, the dream of playing Magic competitively is never dead. I'm not saying this to kill anyone's, vibe and excitement. But many people that are, good enough to make it there did not make it there. It's not that they won't ever make it there, but the best thing you can do if you care a lot about an event like this, work really hard, feel comfortable in the deck you're going to play, and if it doesn't go the way you want, get ready for the next one. I'm playing in a historic event this weekend. There will always be more Magic. So
yeah, absolutely. And just keep in mind that if you're on Magic Twitter and just scrolling through, seeing all these people posting about their wins and how excited they are to be going to the Pro Tour, people only post when they win, right? So you really get this skewed perception that, everyone except me is doing well. It's so difficult to do that. Like Gabriel Maxon, Spider Space. He did that thing, right? He ran the tables on day 2 and snuck in to the Pro Tour. Amazing performance. I think he was playing Rona Combo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I got dinner with him. He was a cool guy.
That's so difficult, right? He had to win out day 2, and that means everyone else who started in that same position, how many of them actually made it? Like, it's just so hard. 1,200 players came into the weekend. 48 are going happily to the Pro Tour. Heartbreak for the next 1,150, and I think you said it. You said it perfectly, Lawson, right before we started recording. Hundreds of people in the room there are capable of qualifying for the Pro Tour, are capable of being pros. The numbers don't add up. Just the nature of the game. Take our lumps and we try again.
Yep. Coffee break's over, back in our head. That's all we can ever do. And by the way, actually, this is a very small side note. I'm going to have to yell at Wizards here for a second. This event qualifies for Barcelona, which is a month after the Lord of the Rings release. That's 45 days from now. The Pro Tour in another country is 45 days from now. If you don't have a passport today, you can't get one.
Yeah, that is a surprise.
Every person that qualified for the Pro Tour should have been asked, by the way, now that you have top 48'd, do we need to tell Wizards that you need to defer this to the next one? Because you can't make it to Barcelona. By the way, a flight to Barcelona, 45 days out, I checked, $900.
Gosh.
If you came in 48th place, the prize money for that was not $900. You beat out 1,100 other people and are now being asked the question. Congratulations for, getting the Atlas Stone to the top of the hill. Would you like to continue on this new hill that we are not going to support you on? That is insane. every one of these players should be given a ticket, and this event should be maybe 2 weeks sooner, a month sooner. Like, logistically, this is a bad look, Wizards.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. I mean, this is the first weekend of regional championships. So the U.S., Mexico, Southeast Asia, and Eastern Canada, they had their regional championships. There's 3 more weeks of regional championships after this. There's Europe next week, Chinese Taipei or Taiwan, West Canada the week after that, Japan and South Korea the week after that. So, yeah, I don't know how this all works logistically. Maybe you can defer your invites. It's not as bad as Lawson is saying. Like, they've changed the prize structure at the Pro Tour itself so that everyone who comes gets some money to offset their travel. But yeah, I mean, they meant what they said when they said this will no longer be a viable career choice. It's just a fun thing you can compete for, to challenge yourself and enjoy the game.
Yeah, I talked to someone that top 16 that was super excited and then realized, wait, I don't have a passport. And so, they're jumping through those hoops, Imagine having a 75% win rate qualifying and then having a question mark of, did this matter?
Oh my gosh.
That's tough. So.
All right. Well, whether you won or lost or did not play at all, there's more Magic to be played, more battles to be fought. Lawson, thanks again for joining us today on the show and sharing some of your insight, your wisdom, and your on-the-floor reporting from Dreamhack. Absolutely. No, super great time. I spent it with all the best people. Like with every single Magic tournament report, the conclusion is the same. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times, but I spent it with people that mattered. The gathering's way better than the Magic. News at 11. I'll see you guys next week. So all that kind of stuff. All right, well said. Well said. All right. That's it for us today. Thanks so much, Lawson. Talk to you later. Absolutely. Peace. Deck lists for this episode can be found at our homepage, faithlessbrewing.com. And tune in next time for more previews from Lord of the Rings, plus testing results with Training Grounds. Support for this podcast is provided by brewers like you. Join the Faithless family and help support the show at patreon.com/faithlessbrewing for Discord access, bonus content, and more. That's all for today. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.